Hi, I'm Dana, and since pretty much my entire channel is just me making videos that would have helped out me when I was younger, I thought we may as well jump on and talk about sexuality as well. I came out a while ago as a lesbian, broke off my 8-year relationship with a man when I realised it, and whenever I say that, people seem to assume that I just somehow lived my life up until I was 25, never having considered or thought about my sexuality, and then suddenly went, oh, I'm gay, when that's not at all what happened. I don't want this whole video to be a rundown of my sexuality, but a very quick rundown would be that I was pretty much always aware that I was into women, but pretty sure I was into men too. And then as I got into my teen years, I was like, oh, no, I'm not. I'm gay, I'm a lesbian, I like women. I came out at school as a lesbian, and then at 16 I started college, met a guy and went, oh, actually, yeah, I quite like this. And then got with him and spent 8 years with him. And then I got a girlfriend because we decided to try polyamory, and I was like, oh no, I am a lesbian. And there's a lot to that. And there's a lot to it. There's a lot that went into it. There's a lot of compulsory heteronormativity, trauma, other things to do with my brain not being the best. You know, there's a whole bunch of shit that goes into that one. But I think one of the really big things was that it feels really scary to change labels. It feels like something you're not really supposed to do. And for me personally, although I'd come out as a lesbian, I knew that I definitely had some degree of attraction to men, and people didn't take me seriously anyway. Like when I came out to my parents, I came out as bisexual because I was just like, they're not going to believe me if I say that I'm a lesbian because I've said that men are attractive in the past. I had a crush on Johnny Depp. So obviously that means you're not really a lesbian, you're definitely bisexual. I had a lot of that. I had a lot of people tell me that I must be a bisexual because I'd said that Johnny Depp or Leonardo DiCaprio were quite pretty, and they are. You can look at my man and say that he's pretty without wanting to bang him, you know? So not only did I sort of feel like I'd been given the label of bisexuality when it wasn't what I actually felt, but I also felt like it was sort of impossible and looked down on to change your label. You know, I went to a fair few little LGBT groups, and it was always a sort of bitchy, snarky little joke when someone came who used to be bisexual and now they've figured out that they're gay or they're this or they're that. It was very much seen as like, if you keep changing your label, that's because you're actually straight. You know, that was the connotation that I picked up on and the implication that I was given by other members of the LGBT community. You know, and I don't want to be too harsh on them because we were teenagers. They didn't know any better. I didn't know any better. It's the way it goes when you're idiot kids, you know? But at the same time, I was growing up in the era where everyone was constantly being told that your sexuality was just a phase. So it kind of felt like, you know, this little LGBT queer group that I'd found was the only place I really felt like I'd belonged. So if I changed my labels, if I was like, I know I said that I was bi when I first came because that was the thing I was telling people, I'm actually pretty sure I'm a lesbian, that'd be a label change. And that'd mean that I was actually faking and pretending to be gay, or I'd figure out that I was straight. So I had to be bisexual. And it's been a big step for me to be like, yo, labels can shift and change, you know? Labels are what you want them to be. I think I've had so many comments online about how I'm giving myself too many labels and you need to stop giving yourself labels, just be who you are. But for me, having labels is part of what makes me feel comfortable in who I am and makes me feel like I am aware of who I am. And being able to label myself with things like autistic and lesbian make me feel like I'm figuring myself out and like I do know who I am. So it's one of those where even though currently I'm very happy and proud to call myself a lesbian. That's how I feel my sexuality is best represented. That's the word that I feel best represents me. I like it. But that might shift, that might change. You know, and as I say, I hope I said at the start, this whole video is supposed to be about how complex sexuality is, so if I didn't say that, sorry. But I think one of the things that people haven't considered as well, or at least that I hadn't considered, that I wasn't aware of, is that you can very much have multiple labels. You know, I thought that having like multiple queer labels was like reserved for trans people who might also be gay or a lesbian. And I was like, oh, they're the only ones that get 2 queer labels. But no, I think that most people, although we may, like I'd say I'm a lesbian, if you really wanted to, like, you know, if I was pissed at a party and you're like, really, like, define that for me. Expand on your sexuality. I would say that I think I'm romantically attracted to men, but romantically and sexually attracted to women. And I don't really know where I lie with everything else. I'm still figuring a lot of stuff out. But, you know, like, I think it's important that the queer community sort of more so expresses that it's okay to change your labels, and it's also okay to figure out, this label does fit me, but it's expansive. There's more to it than just that I'm bi or just that I'm a lesbian, you know? It doesn't just have to be, you're this one thing and that's it. And, you know, maybe that's super obvious to everyone else, but it's not something I picked up on. It's something I could have really done with someone telling me, like in this video. Like, that's what I mean. These videos really are just, here's shit that would have helped me. Maybe someone else will find it useful. You know, I think there's every possibility that having such clear-cut, like, defining labels does work for the majority, but it don't work for me, you know? I feel like there's a lot to sexuality, and I think that there's probably a lot of people who, similarly to me, use a label just because this is the label that feels comfortable, even though it doesn't necessarily encompass all of my sexuality. I don't know if it's a common thing or an autistic thing, but I feel like I felt a lot of pressure at like a really young age, like I'm talking when I was like 13 or 14, to put a label on myself and figure out what my sexuality was, because I knew I wasn't straight. And as soon as you know you're not straight, you're sort of bombarded with all of these different words and different labels and different types of relationships and different things. And it's a lot, you know, it's really overwhelming for a young brain to deal with. And I think that it's very easy to put yourself into labels and into situations and into boxes that don't necessarily fit you properly, because it's a time to learn, it's a time to figure things out. And I think it's always a time to learn, it's always a time to figure things out, you know, like I was 24 having my first time with a woman and being like, oh, I think I'm a lesbian. You know, I don't think it's ever like too late, but I think especially in like your early 20s where I sort of missed out on going crazy and experimenting and seeing what I was all about because I was in a long-term relationship, you know. And I also think that I'd have probably not ended up in that relationship had I not felt so much pressure from other people telling me that I was bisexual. I sort of felt like, you know, there was, like I say, there was a lot of other stuff too. I had a terrible self-esteem, I had a lot of stuff going on, I had a lot of trauma, there was a lot going on. But I think that a very wide part of the reason that I got into a relationship I didn't necessarily want was because I felt so much pressure to like prove myself. Like I'd never been in like a true relationship, but I had been on a couple of dates with girls. So it was sort of like, oh, I'd better go on a date with a guy to prove that I am bi. And that just happened to be the relationship that took off. You know, and it's from that relationship that I'm fairly sure I am romantically attracted to men. I love a rom-com, you know? I love Viggo Mortensen and Philip Glenister. There's certain men that I'm like, I would marry him in a heartbeat, but I don't want to kiss him. I don't want to see him naked. I just want to marry him and have a really good cuddle. This is where I'm going to do a bit of straight bashing, I think. Because it's also, like, you know, how many times have you heard someone talking about being non-binary or being asexual or being demisexual or any of the many, many, many sexualities that are encompassed by the LGBTQ plus symbol without actually being the LGB or T, you know? Suddenly, straight people everywhere are like, what are all these new terms? There's all these new flags. What are these? Why are you making them up? And you know, I sort of just left them to it for the longest time. I just didn't care. And now it makes me really angry because we're not making them up. These are the way that people feel, you know, these are the things that people are experiencing. And to someone who's not experiencing those things, sure, it's just some random word with a flag attached to it, whatever. To the people who are experiencing it, you've just been given a word to describe how you feel. Suddenly, the way that you are, the person that you are, your sexuality, your attraction, there's a fucking word for it, and that is cool as shit. But anything that's considered like a new sexuality, like, you know, for a while I thought I was pan, and the bullshit you get for saying you're pansexual, it's ridiculous. Like, it was only like 10 years ago that I was a teenager in high school, but in the last 10 years, the words that we have to describe gender and sexuality, or at least how well known the words are, has come on so much. Like, You know, I didn't really know what it was to be trans in high school. I did not know at all what it was to be non-binary. I didn't know any of the sexualities that existed outside of the LGBT. You can't expect someone to label themselves and then find out all of these other words for the way that they feel and still stick with the first label. You know, when it comes to sexuality, I do think that there needs to be more support and more... I don't know the word. You know, it needs to be seen as like a good, positive, okay thing to change your label when you feel something else, when you don't feel that it suits you anymore. If you feel like it doesn't suit you anymore, you know, there shouldn't be any pressure to like change your label once a week or something. You don't have to like, oh, well, I've been a lesbian for 8 years, better be straight for a bit, better try bisexuality. I'm not saying that. But, you know, I felt so much stigma and shame and confusion around changing my label and being like, yo, I'm a lesbian, I'm not bisexual, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm a lesbian. You know, it came with a lot of feelings. And not just because everyone apparently hates the word lesbian, but like just to change your label is kind of scary. And I definitely got a lot of like stigma and shame and not good feelings. It didn't feel like I was being greeted nicely for it. And I think that's ridiculous with something so complex that you have to, you know, not everyone obviously, but personally I had to learn so much about myself and so much about a lot of other things to be able to actually figure out what my labels are. I think it's perfectly normal and standard that some people are going to have to change it a few times, and yet it's met with stigma and shittiness. You know, and that's without even touching on like the different facets of sexuality, you know, like in the way that I say, like, I'm fairly certain I'm romantically attracted to men and just not sexually. For the longest time, I didn't know that they could be two different things. I was like, if you think a man's pretty, you must want to bang him. That means that you're like bi. You know? It's something that you do really have to learn about if you're a part of it. And, you know, it's something that I definitely had to learn about. And I think that for most people, if you lay outside of being exclusively like sexually, romantically, physically attracted to one gender, I think it is something that you'll have to sort of figure out and learn about and get to grips with, and it can be kind of a lot. But yeah, it's definitely more complex than I could ever possibly hope to explain, so I have sort of focused on one area here, but I wanted to talk about it and I want to make more gay content essentially. You know, like it's the first time in my entire life that I feel like I've sort of actually figured out my sexuality and I can comfortably, you know, without any sort of like weird bubble in my chest, just be like, I'm a lesbian. Whereas before I'd be like, oh, I'm bisexual. And it felt dirty, it felt like a lie, which really should have told me a lot of things sooner. I'm gonna start a series, I'm not lying, I'm gonna start a series of all the times that I should have fucking realised that I'm gay, because there's a lot. I was gonna start doing TikToks of them, but I don't like TikTok an awful lot. I prefer this long form media, so I'm gonna do a series. That's gonna be a thing at some point. But for now, please do like and subscribe if you like the video. I upload twice a week, so maybe stick around if you want to. I'm gonna go now, so whoever you are, wherever you are, I hope you're having a lovely morning, evening, day, afternoon, week, month, year, and I'll see you again in a few days.